everybody. We're going to send a link to you on how to order the book online or at your local bookstore. And now, Julianna, welcome. And if you could start, just tell us what compelled you to write this book now at this point in your life.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction. Coming from you, a writer I so respect, that's huge. So I truly appreciate it. I think it was sort of just circumstance that I ended up writing this book. The truth is, I started out because, well, after 7 years on The Good Wife, where I literally had no time, I got very sick right when I wrapped the show, and I just finally had time to reflect on my life and why it was that I allowed myself to put everything in front of me before me. And so I started jotting notes down, ideas down. I was in bed for 3 weeks with the chicken pox, and it gave me time to really reflect on my life. And the truth is, it started out as an acting handbook because I was so, Michael J. Fox and I got to work with him a lot on The Good Wife. And I truly, he's one of my favorite people on the planet, just a remarkable man. And he would observe me observing people all the time on my set when we would have a 10-minute break while they were lighting, and we'd be sitting in court, and he watched me watch people's behavior, because I was number one on the call sheet. I felt very responsible for everybody on that set. And I was also a producer. And I was always amazed at how all these incredible actors who had trained at Yale and Juilliard would come to our set, and they knew how to act, but none of them knew set etiquette. And for me, that was baffling. And so Michael J. Fox and I joked about how the two of us, having been on television for so long, should actually write a book about manners on a set, and what that you can't complain at 3 a.m. when you've waited all day to say your monologue. Now you're getting paid for it, so be prepared, like things like that. So I started writing this book, interweaving my childhood into it, just as examples of moments. And at the end of my sick bed, 3 weeks later, I had 9 chapters, and I handed it in to my agent, who had been asking me to write a book, but I never had time when I was on The Good Wife. And the polite note I got back was, well, acting handbooks just don't sell. Your life was nuts. You've got to write about that. And I thought about it long and hard, and I thought, is there a story in here I can pass on to others who maybe had, I don't want to say difficult childhoods. I had a chaotic childhood, full of love, but incredibly hard to navigate. And so I just started writing, and a lot of things come up. As you know, when you start writing things down, you get a clearer picture of your life and of situations. And I think I was at the perfect age also. I think had I been any younger, I wouldn't have been ready. And I realized that my whole life, I had been looking for calm amid this chaotic childhood where I never felt like a stability. I never felt balanced. And I think I craved it so much that I finally, when I found it, I thought, well, why don't I write about that? Maybe I can pass it forward to someone else and show them that just because you have this childhood doesn't mean it's a label for you for the rest of your life.
Well, thank you for that. And, I mean, after reading the book and learning about your family, I think your life was really training for the strange life you've chosen in your profession. And I'm really fascinated by your parents, because in some ways they were so incredibly different, but in one critical way, I think they were very similar. And I think that similarity, it feels to me, resides in you, which is they both were seekers. These were people who didn't just say, oh, this is life and I'm going to just toddle along. They were out there looking and trying to find and trying to grasp. They took very different routes to self-discovery. And I wonder if you could just tell the people tuned in right now a little bit about your parents, maybe how you see them now and how you saw them then.
Yeah, that's a big part of the book too, is this idea of forgiveness. It's very different when you become an adult, you sort of bring this baggage with you from your childhood of all your grievances towards your parents. At least I did. And one of the biggest lessons for me in life, because I really love to be surrounded by a simplistic calm I do drama for a living, so I don't want to live that every day. And I realized that certain feelings I had towards my parents were quite toxic. And it was important for me to get rid of them, to be able to say, this is how I feel. I need an apology, and then I can move on. And because both my parents are real seekers, my father sadly passed away, but they were both seekers. They were very open to it. And I know how lucky I am, because I think many people in my generation, their parents are of a different generation, where that kind of soul searching understanding of, any kind of looking back and saying, you're right, I'm wrong, I apologize. They're of a generation where that's how things work, get over it. My parents actually really heard me both times. I come from divorced parents. They basically were divorced by the time I was a year old. And yet they both were on this path of anthroposophy, which is such a huge can of worms to open. I don't want to go fully into it, because if you had 10 hours, I could tell you all about it. But it's really not what the book is about. But why I mention it in the book is because there's a certain kind of a person who's an anthroposophist. And anthroposophy really means the knowledge of man, basically. Why are we here? What is man's idea of a fulfilled life? Who are we? Who are we in relation to one another? All these esoteric questions. And my father actually introduced my mother to anthroposophy, and my mother, who had been a ballerina when she met my father, was always searching for something else. My mother was born Jewish in Brooklyn, grew up on Flatbush Avenue, but never felt a kinship with the Jewish people. Her grandparents, who lived right above her, had fled Prussia, an anti-Semitic regime, and they didn't celebrate Judaism because they were afraid to do that, because what history had shown them was, if they show people they're Jewish, they'll be persecuted. So she didn't grow up in a loving home and a place that had tradition and Judaism as a part of its center. My father did. My father grew up in an incredibly loving home with a tough mom. I mean, she was one of the first female lawyers to graduate from NYU Law School, and a very loving father, and a Jewish traditional home. And so they came from very different places. So I think they're seeking for sort of a better understanding of life and why we're here, went different places. My father was very practical. My mother was very dramatic. So she took anthroposophy to another level, where she immersed herself completely and changed her entire being. Because of anthroposophy, she changed her name. She was baptized when she was 35 in our backyard when we lived in England. Changed her name from Janice to Francesca after St. Francis, and became a Christian, basically. My father never took it to that level, even though he did. We celebrated Christmas with him because I think his girlfriend and then wife later was Catholic, and it was just, Judaism didn't seem to be a part of our lives. So they both were on this quest to find themselves, but somehow my father always had to show up on time because he was making a living to support 3 little girls and his ex-wife and his current wife. And my mother dove into anthroposophy because she thought she could have a career out of it, which she did. She ended up teaching a form of dance that is in Steiner schools called eurythmy, which is really just speech and music through movement. But as a trained ballerina, she felt that that was the closest thing she could grab onto. And in doing so, on her quest for herself, I think she tended to forget about the needs of her children.
Yes, and I have to say there are parts when I'm reading your book that as the parent of a couple of kids, I really just wanted to smack your parents. No, sorry. I hope they're anyway, but it was really awful. But I have to say it was also interesting. And I think it probably has fed your acting career. But since you started down the Jewish road, and we are at virtually the American Jewish Historical Society, really, and part of the mission of this organization is to look at the American Jewish experience, which I would argue is probably a thing unto itself, different from the European Jewish experience or the Iraqi Jewish experience, or the Singapore Jewish experience. And it's a complex identity, I think, being an American Jew. And I was just wondering, given the additional complexities of your upbringing, what does being Jewish mean to you? I actually Googled you and ethnicity, and it says really? Ashkenazi Jewish.
I am 99% Ashkenazi Jew, 1% French, apparently. Yeah, well, Judaism didn't really come into my life because until I was an adult. And the truth is, it's because it wasn't part of our family tradition. We didn't really have many family traditions, except because I was away from my father all the time. I would see him at Christmas. But when I was 25, I was living in Los Angeles. Well, I was visiting a boyfriend in Los Angeles, taking care of his dog. And I took his dog to the dog park in Santa Monica. And I was feeling I've never been a very good Los Angelian. I'm a New Yorker. I need movement in my life. I need a pace. And I felt out of sorts there. And I took the dog to the park, and this lovely woman started talking to me, and our dogs were playing. And she said, "What do you do?" And I said, this was just before I got ER. And I said, "Oh, I'm an actress." And I said, what do you do? And she said, "I'm a rabbi." And I said, you are? I had never met a female rabbi. So I was absolutely surprised I didn't know there were any, honestly. And her name is Naomi Levy, Rabbi Naomi Levy. And she said, "Why don't you come to my house for Passover dinner?" And I thought, oh, do I really want to do that? Isn't there a lot of prayers and you never get to eat and the Seder takes so long? And she said, "Just come." And I went, and her husband, Rob Eshman, who at the time was a journalist for the Jewish press in Los Angeles, he had an amazing cook. He had made this incredible spread, and there were all sorts of people there, non-Jews, Jews alike, tons of people there. And Rabbi Levy, she led the most beautiful Seder. And I got very emotional, because I think I had always been searching sort of to find my people, right? Because I never had a stable home, and I never had the parents that were, together. I always felt like I was a little bit out on the water, just treading to stay afloat. And suddenly there was this warmth and this energy about it. And a few years later, Rabbi Levy started her own synagogue called Neshuva out in Los Angeles that I started going to. Every weekend I went. In fact, I took my father, he was visiting me when I was on ER, and I said, "I really want you to come to Neshuva with me." And he loved it. He thought it was really fantastic because it was for me, the way she taught about Judaism was a spiritual experience. I always felt that any religion felt sexist to me, or that I didn't belong somehow. And I searched when I was in college and just feeling very alone. I really searched for some sort of community, and I definitely didn't find it in religion. I found it in my friends ultimately at school, but with Neshuva, there was such an acceptance of who you were with this tradition of Judaism. And also it was music, and she leads beautiful sermons. So in the end, when I finally, I'm jumping a few years because I know we don't have that much time, but when I met my husband, who was raised Jewish, and it was important to him to have a Jewish wedding and to raise our son Jewish and to have our son bar mitzvahed. The irony of all of it is that my husband considers himself an atheist. It's not, and I would say, I don't understand. You want that? I don't care. I'll marry you wherever you want to get married. It's fine. But how can you call yourself an atheist? And he said, for me, Judaism is about family and tradition and history. And when he put it that way, I thought, well, this is something I have craved, right? Family, community, tradition, and the history of that. And so it is important to us. We're not very religious Jews, but we try and do Shabbat dinner every Friday night. Now our son is 14, so it's a little harder to get him home. But even if it's inviting friends over, even if it's just lighting the candles and saying goodbye to the work week and hello to the weekend, like that's a part of Judaism. It's my favorite part because what you're saying is enough. We put that aside now and we focus on one another. So there's things about it. So I actually now, it took me years to get there, but I'm so grateful that I met my husband and that I met Naomi Levy, because they brought a spiritual community back into my life through Judaism.
Wow, thank you for that. It's interesting. Some of the comments in the Q&A, people are asking a lot of compliments. You're such an amazing actress. What does it feel like to inspire people? But I think part of what people are seeing in the characters you create are this thought process you bring to everything, to your identity, to your past. And that's what you write about in the book. I mean, you don't write about that in the book, but you write about the things that create that. And yet, with all of that, all of this intelligence and beauty and success, one of the things that really came through to me is, wow, this person has really earned her diva spurs. And yet I would say you're the opposite of a diva. Even in setting up this interview, we had an email exchange. You didn't stick 27 assistants between it. It was sort of like, okay, let's just get this done and in a nice way. And yet sometimes when I read about the pressure you put on yourself throughout your life, getting straight A's, being on time, and we're going to talk about your teeth in a few minutes, but going to work when you're like in excruciating pain and thinking that that's okay. So what do you think? I mean, I'm sure you have other people to talk about with this, but where do you think that comes from? That intense self, that Calvinistic rigor?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Something I ask myself that all the time. I know that, look, I think we're all born a certain way, right? One of the reasons I called the book Sunshine Girl was because that was the nickname my mother gave me. I'm the third of three daughters, and I was the easy one. Right. So she labeled me Sunshine Girl because I never cried when I was a baby, and I didn't ruffle feathers. I went with the flow. And as lovely as that is to be called that, it is a very difficult moniker to get rid of as you become an adult. And because I grew up wanting everyone to be happy around me, I thought that was my job, was to make people happy. I then sacrificed a lot of my own happiness to maintain that status as an adult in relationships, especially with men. I even if I was unhappy in a relationship, I didn't want to ruffle, I just hung in there. It's like, I'll just stick it out because one of the reasons I think, first of all, why am I always on time? My mother was always late. Always late. And I vowed at probably age 11, I will never, ever be late. When I can drive my own car and get there myself, I'm never going to be late. I mean, I think we do a lot of things as adults opposite from the way our parents were when we were children. And that can go both ways, right? So, my my drawers were never organized. I never had the right clothes for school. My mother threw whatever she could find in a bag for my school lunch. And it was embarrassing taking it out at my desk going to school in England, because all these girls with their white bread cucumber sandwiches in perfect squares, and I've got like leftover Chinese food in a thing. Like I was just always embarrassed. And obviously the reason I became an actress was because I lived in so many different countries and never had the right wardrobe, the right accent, the right home. So I was so much more comfortable in other people's shoes, right? And one of the things while writing this book, I realized like it is time for me to be comfortable in my own shoes. I don't need to search for a character to play where I can feel fully at home, which is, I think, why I have had somewhat of a successful career, because when I get into a character, there is such a freedom to not be that sunshine girl, because it's written on the page, got to do it. Sorry, not my fault. Don't have any responsibility for it. I can be the worst person in the world because that's the character I'm supposed to play. That's my job. And there's such a freedom to that for me, because I don't have to carry the weight of feeling like I'm supposed to be a certain way to other people, which made me very aware, about my own child. Like you also experience your own parents differently once you've had a child, right? So there's part of that. And I do write about this in the book, where my son's drawers are organized. My son always has every single thing he needs. When he goes to camp, every single shirt I put a label on it. I mean, I'm so on top of his stuff. And then I realize, oh my God, I'm not letting him fight his own battles either. When I realized he couldn't tie his own shoes when he was 7, it was because I was tying them for him to show him how much I loved him. But that's also crippling, right? So it's this fine balance. I mean, look, every parent, we're all going to do it wrong at some point, we're never going to be perfect. But then I thought, oh, I'm not letting him fight his own battles. I'm not letting him learn for himself. I have to back off, and let him fight through life, because that's what makes you strong. But I will tell you the one thing, and I hope it came through in the book, because I really mean it. The one thing I do realize in life is that without love, all the crazy in the world was happening around me, but I never felt unloved. I was so loved by both my parents. And I think that is a huge way of expressing a belonging for a child. When you feel loved, even though you don't have certain things, there's a confidence it gives you. And that's the one thing both my parents always said to me was, you can do anything. Look at you. You can do anything. And it gave me the confidence, I think, to go out into the world and do it. And I think when you have that kind of support from your parents, that verbal recognition of, we believe in you, it almost cancels out all the crazy. Well, almost.
Well, that does lead me to think of something I was thinking about. I think I wrote to you that really the part of the book that really tore me up was, I think it was right before you were getting married, and your father sent you this package of your old letters to him. And just so people haven't read the book yet, Julianna was raised in many different places, but most often not very close to where her father was. But he sent you all these letters you wrote to him. And for him, I think this was really, he thought this was this great gift. He had it all wrapped up in a red ribbon. And I think he thought, what a nice present. And it sounds like a nice present, and it tripped off. It's incredible to read that it tripped off something really powerful in you. And so I wonder if you could just tell people a little bit of the context of those letters and this confrontation, and I think catharsis that followed from it.
Yeah, well, so my mother had taken we had lived in England when I was very young, until I was the age of 6. And my father lived in London. We lived in Sussex. And then we all moved back to the States when I was 6, where I started first grade in Spring Valley, New York. And my dad lived in Manhattan. And it was a really nice life to me because I saw my dad on weekends. He was 45 minutes away. I learned to speak in an American accent really quickly. I had my friends. I had my school. We were in our old house. I had my own room for the first time. I mean, I just felt like I belonged somewhere. And 5 years later, my mother said, well, I'm going to move us to England. And at that point, my eldest sister had already moved out of the house, and she had really been sort of a surrogate mother to me. She always took care of me and looked out for me. And I don't blame her at all for moving out. Her and my mother they just didn't get along. And at the age of 12, my sister said, I'm out of here, and went to live with my father in New York. And she was also studying at the School of American Ballet, and her schedule was really rigorous, and she couldn't do the commute anymore. So it was me and my middle sister, Rachel, and my mom. And at the end of 5th grade, my mother said, we're moving back to England. And it devastated me. And I didn't want to go. And I had no choice. And I went, and everything was wrong. You know, we didn't have the proper home. My mother couldn't find us an apartment. We lived in a home for mentally challenged children where she taught. They gave us sort of this apartment with another couple that lived there. It wasn't a good situation. And I wrote all these letters to my father that were desperate signs of help, even though they were cloaked in the sunshine girl. I love you. I don't want to cause anyone any, do you think it would be okay to come home for Christmas, or is it too expensive? Or I never want to leave America again. I can't wait to come home. Just all these words coming from a little girl to her father, whose address was 50 East 89th Street. My father lived on the Upper East Side, not in an overly fancy apartment, but to me, when you're living in a home for mentally challenged children, and with a hippie couple down the hallway, and you're on a horsehair cot with your sister, it felt like his life was incredibly beautiful and glamorous and wealthy. And my life, it was like I was the scullery maid, At the time, you just accept it when you're little. So all these letters that I'd been sending for 2 years to my father from England, that's what he wrapped up in a bow. And so I'm 2 months pregnant with my son. I'm sitting on my office floor. I finally had time to read the letters. And I found them so disturbing. Not only, I kept looking at the return address and then the address I was sending them to, reading the letters and going, wait, and now I'm 40 at this point, right? And I've never once blamed my father for anything. I always put all the blame from my crazy life on my mother. And mothers get all the complaints. But I think at that moment, with my hormones raging, I kept thinking about this little being in me and thinking, wait, my husband, Keith, would never let that happen to his child. Where was my father? Why didn't he say no? He's the one sending alimony. Why didn't he come and save us? These letters are saying, help me. Where was he? And I called him and I told him, I said, I don't understand why you think these letters are sweet. They're horrible. And how could you have let her do that? Why did you let her do that? Take us away from you. And I was really angry. I was very emotional. I mean, pregnancy probably was helping that, but I still get emotional thinking about it. And my dad, who was such a calm, gentle soul and hated confrontation, he was so gutted because we really had a great relationship at that point. Yeah. And I know how proud he was of me. And I loved him so much. The last thing, I ever wanted to do was cause any kind of pain. But at 40 and pregnant, I realized I'd put him up on this pedestal my whole life because he was this uber successful, handsome. Everybody loves Paul Margulies. Everybody. To this day, I bump into people on the street in New York who tell me how wonderful my dad was. And I agree. but he let two of his little girls go and live with a crazy woman in a home for mentally challenged kids when they were 11 and 14. Like that's, and they're crying out for help and no one's coming. So what were you doing, Paul? And that was tough. It was a tough call for him. And God bless him. He wrote me a letter, a really long, beautiful letter, and said, I had no idea that you were suffering so much. I didn't see it. I couldn't see beyond that. I thought I was doing the right thing by sending alimony and child support and making sure your school was paid for and making sure you could go to horseback riding camp in the summer and all the things I thought you loved, and treating you at Christmas time when you came to New York to see me. And I missed you too, all the things. And what was so beautiful about it was the closure I had, because he acknowledged it. He didn't get defensive. He said, I'm sorry, I should have done more. At that point, that's all he can do. And I was good. It's like I said, that's so brave of you to be able to do that, because I'm sure it was a horrible phone call to get. And the truth is, moving on from it, it's like it was this burden lifted from my shoulders, and my acceptance of his apology was a burden lifted from his shoulders. And so when he did suddenly, literally just drop dead in 2014 from an aneurysm, for me, as sad as I was, we were good.
Yeah.
There was so much love between us. And I think part of my book, I want to say, because I have a lot of friends who have tremendous anger towards their parents, and they're my age. And I want to say, they're still alive. You can fix it. Don't let them die in anger. Life's too short.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I did give, so just so people who haven't read the book yet, Julianna's dad was in advertising and quite successful. He was, I guess, the Mad Men era kind of.
He was.
But I gave him a lot of credit also for that letter, because he did, like, as you said, he acknowledged, he apologized. He didn't try to make excuses for himself while explaining. Right. So that was great. I must say, when you finally meet your husband, I was so relieved. Okay. Oh, good. She's making what looks like a pretty good choice here. So I'm loving talking to you, and I have a million more questions myself, but we have so many questions in the chat. So do you mind if we just do a quick round of?
Sure, of course.
Okay. I don't know how you're going to answer this, but Jamie French wants to know, when you first became an actress, did you ever think you would be so loved and adored by millions of people around the world?
Oh, that is so sweet of you to say. I don't know if it's true, but if it is, no, I really thought when I became an actress, I was just so excited that I was going to be able to make my living doing what I love. But I never in a million years thought it would reach the millions of people it has. And I'm thrilled that it has.
Oh, it's great. So, I like this question. So you mentioned in the book how much you love performing theater. Any plays or musicals you've seen recently that you really loved?
I'm forgetting the name of it, but Alex Edelman does a one-man show. I forget.
He was a guest on At Lunch.
Oh, really? Oh, I think it's spectacular. And if you can see it, see it. It's so fantastic. That was the last play I saw. I'm seeing Bedwetter in 2 weeks from now. And so my child finishes school in a week. So now I'm going to start seeing as many plays as I can.
So somebody just says your book changed her life, which is pretty great, what every author wants to hear.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting question. So I remember watching ER when I was 12 years old. Someone writes, and I immediately fell in love with Carol. She inspired me to no end. Did you ever think you would be the reason people would want to better themselves?
Oh, wow. No, I think as a child, I kept journals since I was 9 years old, which helped me write the book tremendously. It also helped chronologically. And in those journals, I always was writing about wanting to help people in some way. And so I never dreamed I'd be able to do the kind of response I've had from this book too. And also from playing the characters I've played. I mean, from Alicia Florrick, Carol Hathaway to Laura Peterson lately. But I've had women stop me on the street with tears in their eyes saying they were going through a horrible divorce when I was on The Good Wife, and saying how my characters saved them, and of course it's not me, it's the writing, but I'm the conduit. So when I hear things like that, or especially young girls coming up to me all over the world, wherever I am, telling me they went to law school because of Alicia Florrick, the LGBTQ community coming up to me recently, I've been able to go to a couple of book events and just with tears in their eyes saying, thank you for portraying a gay character who isn't a caricature.
Yeah.
That for me is the most rewarding of all.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious too, and people have alluded to this in the question. So how do you decide what role to play? Is it serendipity that this particular role comes up and it just makes a click? Do you seek out certain roles? I mean, how do you, because you can pick and choose which role you want to spend 90 hours a day killing yourself for?
I think it's a good combination of both. I've been so lucky because of the way sort of just the stars aligned, with ER and The Good Wife. And then with the morning show, that just landed in my lap in the middle of a pandemic, that role. And I really missed working. I love acting so much. And it was just such a great role. I couldn't refuse getting on a plane in the middle of lockdown and going to shoot. But I'll tell you, I am picky, and I have heard a lot of complaints from people that I'm not in enough. And here's what I'll say. I read scripts every day. And since The Good Wife finished, I have been getting offers, and I always think, I know what I do when I work. I throw myself so much into it. It's exhausting and also fantastic. But at this point in my career, I don't want to do anything that doesn't light a fire in my belly, because I have, my kid's going to be a freshman next year. Like I have 4 more years of him home. So unless it's really worth it to me, like Laura Peterson, then it's just not worth my time. And so on that front, I will tell you all that, but I can't say more than this, that I have actually created my own character, and a big streaming network just bought it, and I'll let you know when the deal is done. But I am going to be executive producing, and I have created a character with my producing partner, and it's going to be a great show. And that's all I can tell you.
Well, that's great. So question here from somebody who I presume is in her 20s. She asks, what advice would you give someone in their 20s?
Oh yeah, I wish I could have said this to myself in my 20s. Stop worrying so much. Learn to meditate. And every day you should write down one step at a time. Because I think when you're in your 20s, you sort of see everything. It's so big and you want to conquer it all, or it feels too heavy, or, I still do it. Sometimes when I know that I've got to do this, and this, and oh my God, I have to put the laundry in, but wait, I have an interview, and I go, breathe, just breathe. You'll get it all done. One step at a time. And by the way, if it doesn't all get done, you're going to be okay. And the word that I always use in our household, I try to say this to my child because I don't want to sound like a broken record to him when I say, don't do this and don't do that, the word I try to use for my family and for myself is be mindful, right? So just be mindful. That's what I would tell my 20-year-old self.
That's very good advice. So quite a few questions about the book. Are you going to be doing events outside of New York? But before you do answer their question, I have a question related to the book, and maybe it's because I'm a writer. But okay, how do you compare the two processes of writing versus acting, creatively, anxiety producing wise, even publicity wise? What's the same and what's different?
It's a very different animal. It's because I just finished Delia Ephron's memoir, Left on 10th, and I wrote her an email to tell her how beautiful it was. I had just come from Connecticut, where a bookstore had done an in-store book signing, and I said, it is amazing to me that my book came out a year ago, and yet it's still living on and it very much alive. And I guess with acting, with my book, it's so personal. I feel much more vulnerable than with acting. And by the way, I was petrified writing this book. It really helped that I had a great editor, and that's why the letter from my father is in the book. I had originally written that chapter with just snippets of the letter, and she called me the second I sent it to her. She said, I need the whole letter. And I was like, oh God, no, that's so. And she said, trust me. And you're not the only one, Julie. I can't believe how many people have been so affected by that letter. So with a book, it's very much the creating of it. I really miss it, to be honest. I miss, I'm in my office right now, but I miss coming into my office every morning. I had a real ritual once everyone was out of the house, that you have your coffee, and I'd always light a candle and I'd sit down and I'd stare at an empty screen. And then some days I didn't get up for 4 hours because it just came flowing out of me. And then other days I would look at the screen and it was just blank. I was like, I've got nothing. There's nothing here. And then I'd panic that I wasn't a good enough writer. My father was a writer. So, and I love reading so much. So, and I'm so respectful of authors that I just thought, who do you think you are that you can enter this arena? Like, stay in your lane, what are you doing? With acting, once you've done it, it's over. And even though with television, because I didn't write it, I'm not responsible for anything but the performance. So there's a different, and I feel very confident as an actor. It's what I'm good at. So I have much more, it pertains to taste. If a reviewer doesn't like my acting, it's apples and oranges. I always say that at the Oscars or any award show. I'm like, well, how can you compare a performance? That's crazy. Whereas with a book, it's so vulnerable because, a memoir anyway. I was new to it. So for me, the writing is scarier than the acting, but I love this journey it's taken me on because it has such a long life. And, and then all of a sudden it starts getting published in different countries. And now that all starts to bubble up and you go, wow. And I strangely never get tired of hearing what people have to say about it, because everybody responds differently to different characters in the book. And I love in any way that I just, contributed to making people think about their own lives or change something that wasn't working. So.
Thank you so much. Well, we're getting towards the end, but there is a question that I think that we've gotten several variations of it, and it is the beginning of Pride Month, and we've gotten a lot of questions about the incredible Laura Peterson, who often started my day and ended it. So, several people have complimented you on the way you play her, but somebody asked, what was your experience playing a queer woman? Was there anything different about that than preparing for other roles?
That's a great question. Honestly, no. She was so well written, and I have so many gay friends in my life that for me, it was more a relief, to be honest, to play this completely confident, unapologetically gay, successful journalist.
Mhm.
I found it so refreshing that I didn't feel at all that I needed. The only thing that I may have done differently was, strangely, you know, the love scenes I have with Reese, you know, we just were very delicate about it. You know, is this okay? Is that okay? You know, and then we would just start laughing, and by the end, it was like, "I'll do whatever you want. Doesn't matter." But isn't it funny? I know this is going to sound strange. When I was playing Laura Peterson, I actually never thought about being gay. I just was gay. Does that make sense? Like it didn't hit me that I'm having a love affair with someone of the same sex. I think the writers were so good in portraying Laura Peterson that for me, it was just Laura Peterson having an affair. It didn't really cross my mind that it happened to be a woman, because I think the way they made her was she had gone through so much earlier that where she was when you meet her, it has to be refreshing. And I think also not having to, I don't think she carried it as a burden anymore where she was. So that's how I tried to play her, where it was like, this isn't this isn't, I don't walk around as Julianna saying I'm a heterosexual person. You know what I mean? So why would I walk around as Laura saying I'm a gay person? It's just me.
Yeah.
And that's how I approached her.
Right. And I think that's why people appreciate the portrayal so much, because it's real and it's human.
Yeah.
So we are over time, but it's been such a pleasure. But before we go, there are several ways you can read this book. You can read it in hardcover, you can read it now in paperback, and you can listen to it because Julianna also narrated the audiobook, and I've also listened to part of it, but then you know what? I love the audiobook, but in the end I had to read it. But I highly recommend any or all versions. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks so much for that interview, Julia. It was really fun. Such a pleasure to meet you in person, sort of.
You too. Yes. Thank you. You too.
All right. Thank you, everyone.